Hey everyone, welcome back to another TEAS lesson. Today we are going to look at a very important body system, the immune system. So here is the comparison between TEAS 6 and TEAS 7. Even though I do have some new topics listed here, they have been covered in TEAS 6. It's just that ATI decided to make these topics very specific, very clear in the learning objectives. So that's why they added these specific topics. And again, these have been covered under TEAS 6. So technically, there is very little new information for TEAS 7. All right. Now, when you look at the learning objectives, it's very similar to other body systems. You have to know the specific parts of this particular system and the functions, right? And then the relationship between this particular body system, which is immune system, and other body systems, how they work collectively, right, to achieve protection of our body from pathogens or any other foreign invaders that could potentially harm us. Okay, I included this actually in my TEAS 6 video, but I think this is a very straightforward flow chart. It really helps you understand the different parts of the immune system and specifically the 3 lines of defense. So the first and the second lines of defense, remember, these are under the innate defense system. And the innate defense system is non-specific, meaning the system will try to protect the body from all foreign invaders. Okay, it's not specific. Anything that's recognized as foreign, as non-self, will be removed or destroyed by this particular part of the immune system. For the first line, it's mostly surface barriers, right? Something that can physically block the entries of foreign invaders. So this includes the skin, right, which is on the outside of our body, and the mucous membranes. So these are usually found inside, right? When you look at all the tracts in our body, the inner lining is the mucous membrane, right? So think about respiratory system, urinary system, reproductive system, digestive system, right? They're all kind of have this inner kind of mucous membrane lining. And both the skin and the mucous membrane form physical barriers, right, on the body surface or inside the body, so that the foreign invaders, they cannot enter our body. And then the third component in the first line is the protective chemicals and mucus. So these are associated with the skin and the mucous membranes. So think about the sweat secreted by the skin, right? Sweat, salty, right? Tastes salty. It has salts, which can often inhibit the growth of microorganisms. And same thing for acid. Most of you probably know that the skin is a little bit acidic, right? And a lot of the pathogenic organisms do not like that acidic environment. So they don't grow, they don't multiply very well in the acidic environment, such as the skin. So the salts and the acid secreted by the skin are protective chemicals. And how about mucus? So think about your respiratory system. The cells in the epithelial layer can secrete mucus, right, which is that sticky, kind of gross substance, but they are very good at trapping dust, particles, and the pathogens, right? So those pathogens cannot reach deep down into your lungs and potentially get you sick. Okay, so that's another very good protection mechanism associated with the mucous membrane. And these are all part of the first line of defense. So again, remember, the first line of defense is surface barriers. It could be on the body surface on the outside, or it could be on the inner surface, but they form that physical barriers. Now, that physical barriers may have associated chemicals, are also part of the first line of defense. Okay, now the second line of defense consists of a variety of immune cells. And these immune cells are very powerful They're wonderful. They can destroy most of the foreign invaders. Okay? So since TEAS 7 specifically mentions the types of cells, I will go into details. So we'll talk about phagocytes and the natural killer cells. So let me just kind of jump to the last 3 items. So in the second line, you have cells. You also have chemicals, protective chemicals. And these chemicals are mostly proteins, such as interferons and complement. The second line of defense can also involve certain processes. For example, inflammation, right? Well known that infections can lead to inflammation, but it is a natural response of the body to infection. Now, sometimes inflammation is not good, right? It brings pain, it brings discomfort. So we tend to take a medication to kind of reduce inflammation. But again, it is the body's natural response to fight off infections. And fever, very similar to inflammation, it's the body's natural response to infection, right? When do you have fever? When you have infection. Could be bacterial infection mostly. It could be viral infection, right? So for example, fever is a pretty common symptom for COVID-19. For the second line, again, you have cells, immune cells, different types of immune cells that do different things. You also have proteins, chemicals, right? And then you also have processes. So the second line is really pretty diverse. Now, the third line is under this adaptive defense system. Okay. Now, for adaptive immune response, it's very, very specific, meaning the system and its associate cells that have been activated, they only target a specific type of pathogen. So, for example, you may have this adaptive defense against the coronavirus that causes COVID-19, right? Okay. Or you may have, a different adaptive defense response that only targets the virus that causes common cold, right? So you can see it's very specific. It does not respond to all the foreign invaders that enter your body, right? It responds to a specific type of virus or specific type of bacterium. Now, under this category, for the third line, we have humoral immunity, which involves antibody. Okay? Now, make sure you know that the protective effect of vaccines is really based on the humoral immunity, right? So when you're vaccinated for a specific pathogen, a specific disease, the vaccine, the deactivated or dead pathogen in the vaccine can activate humoral immunity so that your body makes antibody. And this antibody can protect you from future infection of that particular pathogen. And it can be produced very, very quickly, very rapidly, so that it can destroy the pathogen before it makes you sick, right? The second component of the third line of the adaptive defense is this cellular immunity, and that involves T cells. Okay, I forgot to mention the humoral immunity involves B cells. Certain strains of B cells can produce antibodies. Now, going back to the cellular immunity, it involves T cells. Okay. Now, for cellular immunity, the immune cells can directly attack abnormal cells. For example, virus-infected cells or cancer cells. They do not make any antibodies. Okay, so you can think of it this way: T cells directly kill the bad cells, right? But B cells will make some weapons, right, like antibodies. So this is a quick summary of the 3 lines of defense. Now let's tie this with other body systems. Okay, so how are they involved in the immune response in the 3 lines of defense? For the first line, you have the skin, right, which is the integumentary system. It's a very big body system. And then you have a mucous membranes. So these are often part of some kind of body system, right? It could be respiratory system, if you were talking about the inner lining of the respiratory tract. And it could be, urinary system, right? If it's the inner lining of the urinary tract. So it really involves, a lot of the other body systems. Now, for the second line, for instance, a fever. So you probably remember the specific organ in your body that's considered the thermostat, right? It regulates your body temperature. Do you remember which one it is? Right, it's the hypothalamus, right? Hypothalamus. So if there's an infection, the hypothalamus will respond by kind of adjusting the body's set temperature. It's going to increase that temperature, which leads to fever. So you can see in this process, in the process of fever, there is a part of the brain, right, that's involved to regulate that temperature. Coming to the second topic specified in TEAS 7 is different types of cells. Now, the first line of defense doesn't really have specific cells. So we are only focusing on the second line and the third line here. For the second line, remember we have macrophages, neutrophils, and those are known as phagocytes. So phago means eat. That means these cells can eat the pathogens. So they can engulf, they can swallow those pathogens and destroy them. So there are two main types of phagocytes, macrophages. And macrophages come from monocytes, which are present in the blood. So once the monocytes leave the bloodstream and enter the tissues, they become macrophages, and they have a big appetite for foreign invaders. Okay? Now, normally macrophages are always on guard to protect us. So they're always there, but sometimes they need some help, right? So neutrophils can come to the site of injury, and they are kind of the military reinforcements, right? They can help macrophages to fight off the foreign pathogens. Okay, so those two are the main types of phagocytes. So similar to monocytes, once the neutrophil cell leaves the bloodstream and enters the tissue, it becomes phagocytic. It has this ability to engulf pathogens, for example, a bacterium. Okay, now for the second line of defense, we also have these natural killer cells. Now, the NK cells are very different than the phagocytes because the phagocytes will engulf a lot of things, really a variety of things. It could be a bacterium, right? It could be viral particles that's outside the cell. It could be worn out cells, damaged cells. So they really do eat a lot of things. But natural killer cells are different because they do not eat other things. They are not phagocytic. They cannot engulf or swallow anything. They kill abnormal cells by releasing cytotoxic substances. Cyto means cell, right? And you all know what toxic means. So these substances are toxic to cells, and this is the weapon that NK cells use to kill abnormal cells. So what are considered abnormal cells? Virus-infected cells. These cells are not doing anything good because eventually they're going to die, and they are just a site for the virus to multiply. So we do not want those cells to be alive. We want to destroy those infected cells. Cancer cells, of course, we don't want them to be present. So that's the job for natural killer cells, and also cytotoxic T cells to destroy the cell. All right, now for the third line of defense, so again, remember, now we're talking about a different arm of the immune system, right? Now we're looking at the adaptive immune response arm. So this line of defense involves different types of lymphocytes, right? The two main types are B cells and T cells. So there's a little bit of description here. And again, remember, B cells can produce antibody. That's a very important information. Another cell that's mentioned in the TEAS study manual is this antigen-presenting cells. So these APC cells present a pathogen's antigen signature to helper T cells. In order for the immune cells to recognize that a cell is foreign, is pathogenic, it has to be able to recognize the protein pattern, the antigen pattern, or antigen signature on the surface of that cell. But a lot of times, the cells cannot read those patterns, those signatures, and they need the help from a different group of cells. And the cells that can help are called antigen-presenting cells, the APC cells. Now, for B cells, I do want to point out that if you see the term plasma cells, that's just B cells, because there are different types of B cells. And the plasma cells are the B cells that can secrete, that can produce antibodies. There are different types of T cells, but I don't really think that you need to know the differences between the 3 types of T cells. Just kind of remember that T cells are involved in adaptive immune response, and specifically in this second component, cellular immunity. When you think about this, cellular, that refers to cells. And which cells can directly kill? That's T cells, right? B cells can't do that. B cells have to make antibodies to fight off pathogens. All right, I think that's the only topics that I want to kind of go over for the updated immune system lesson. Okay, I hope you are ready for some practice questions. Question number 1. Vaccination activates this particular type of immune response to produce antibodies. Okay? So there are some keywords here. This involves vaccination, and this immune response produces antibodies. So this should be an easy question, and that will be adaptive immune response. And specifically, it's a humoral immune response, right? Because this involves B cells. Now, this is not innate immune response, because innate immune response is innate, meaning you're born with it. You don't have to acquire that. Okay? But for adaptive immune system, your body has to be exposed to that particular pathogen before your body can generate this adaptive immune response. Okay, so it's almost like you have to kind of acquire that. All right, C, comprehensive. I haven't really seen this term anywhere, so they just made up something to kind of trick you. Inflammation does not involve any antibodies. It involves some substances that can induce this inflammation process, like histamine. It also involves certain immune cells, like macrophages and phagocytes convert or transformed from neutrophils. All right, question 2. All right, I think I mentioned the answer in the previous question. Vaccination activates this particular type of immune cells to produce antibodies. Okay, next question. Which of the following immune cells destroy pathogens by phagocytosis? That means the cell is phagocytic, right? It can engulf pathogen, or it could be cell particles, right? Cell parts. Which cells can do that? Definitely neutrophils, right? Neutrophils can leave the blood, enter the tissue, and become phagocytic. Yeah, they can eat pathogens. And so is B, right? Macrophages. Macrophages, have a big appetite for pathogens, like I mentioned earlier. Memory B cells, they can remember the pathogen, so it allows the system to produce antibodies much faster upon future exposure to the same pathogen. But it cannot eat any other cells. Cytotoxic T cells, no. So similar to NK cells, so I'm just going to put these together. They do not swallow any cells. They do not engulf any cells. Instead, they release cytotoxic chemicals, and these chemicals can kill the cells. Okay, so correct answer is A and B. All right, next question. The respiratory tract secretes mucus to trap dust and pathogens in the air. This demonstrates the action of what type of immune response. Select all that apply. So the respiratory tract has cells, right, that secrete mucus, and this is the mucus membrane layer, right? And we know that this layer and its associated product, such as mucus, are part of that surface barrier, right? And then that's the first line of defense. Now, don't forget that the first line of defense is also part of the innate immune response. So B and C. All right, guys, good job. You finished another lesson. So you are one step closer to getting ready for TEAS. All right, I hope this is helpful. I will see you next time.